Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Is this the right one?
That's the right one. Have a chair.
Thank you very much. I apologize. On the end of the day, I believe. You guys have been interviewing all afternoon, so I do apologize that I'm the last one on you.
We're good, we're good.
I'm a good
So I just think I'll go around and have everyone introduce themselves and start down at my right, Councilmember Farrell.
Chris Feraldi, I represent Ward 4.
I'm Sterling Wilder, Ward 2.
Bill Wright, at large.
Mary Jane Dolan, Ward 1.
Jeff Helgeson, Ward 3.
Dr. Trinae Tweedy, at large.
Randy Nelson, at large.
Okay, and I think we will start with Councilmember Nelson. We'll just throw some questions at you. And
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Dr. Struble, how do you pronounce your name?
Struble. That's
Struble.
fine. It happens all the time. No
Okay,
worries.
all right. We want to get it right. Thank you for being here and for applying. This is, we have very difficult decisions over the next couple of weeks. For many years, the Lynchburg School Board has repeatedly approved LCS administration's policies and proposals and budgets without any real critique. And this has, from my perspective, over the last handful of years, resulted in some ineffective outcomes, some chronic exodus of teachers, highly professional and skilled, experienced administrators, and other personnel. It has caused some extensive declines in the student enrollment within the public schools. It has produced some material disconnects between teachers, their students, and the families of those students. And it has led to some inflated LCS budgets and financial inefficiencies. If you were a member of the LCS board, what would you do to hold the LCS administration professionally accountable and ensure that LCS might again deliver the promises and policies ingrained in its mission statement, every child by name, by need to graduation?
Thank you all for letting me interview and for allowing me to come here today. And that's a great question. I also think it's probably a problem across most of the United States when it comes to K-12 schools. And so working with Lynchburg City specifically and being potentially a part of the board, I would want to work with the other board members, those that have been a part of the board, for a few years, who have experience more than I would coming on, and kind of really dig in and figure out what the problem is and where I can see and where it's at. I would want to look at a targeted approach and maybe figure out which schools may have a broader issue, may have a bigger issue, but do so with respect and with integrity and transparency. I think it would be wise to work with the administration. They are the administration and they have a bit more knowledge than I would. So I'd love to take their professional opinion and recommendations into consideration, and as a board, come together to try our best to develop a targeted approach to fix any issues we may have. We want high quality teachers and educators, and they may not be staying, and there might be a reason. And so if there's policies in the way or circumstances that are hindering the retention of faculty, that's something we want to look at right away. Along with, I believe you brought up declining enrollment. That's another issue to look at as well and kind of figure out why might that be occurring, where are students going? If Lynchburg is growing and the population is growing, then maybe why are some of our school enrollments declining? So it's a matter of looking at as many perspectives and data points that we can, so we can properly assess and evaluate what's going on and then make a strategic decision to move forward. And that takes a collaborative approach. I don't think would say that I have the sole ideas of how to fix that, but I would love to be a part of that and collaborate with those that are involved, that have knowledge base, and really figure out what we can do to solve any problems that may come forward.
Okay, Dr. Struble, what qualifications do you think you particularly have that will enable you to target those issues and come up with solutions?
Professionally, I've worked in higher education for over 10 years in a variety of roles, just having to collaborate with not only internal agencies within my institution, but also externally. I have dealt a lot with external accreditation, so I've dealt with a lot of regulatory bodies from the outside coming in, telling us or asking us to do certain things in a certain way, which is good and can be bad in certain ways, but what we do is we work to figure out a way to collaborate as an institution, collaborate with outside organizations to come and meet together. And so I have experience working with our institution's accreditor, SAC-COC. I've also worked with the Virginia Department of Education when it comes to licensure requirements for teacher education and preparing the next generations of K-12 teachers. So professionally, I've just been involved with a lot of different organizations, different outside entities, and internally being a part of a large institution of higher education. There's a lot of different departments, individuals I need to work with there. So collaboration and working together is really key with a lot of what I do. And so being able to bring that to the board and the community and working together is something that I believe I could do.
Thank you very much. I appreciate some of your background. A few years ago, I was the public trustee of SACS from the Commonwealth of Virginia, so I understand what's involved in that analysis.
We just finished our 5th year, and we're preparing for our reaffirmation right now, gearing up for it. So it's fun.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Struble, for coming. What is your level or experience and involvement with public education in general, and then in particularly Lynchburg City Schools?
Okay. I guess I have to go way back to my K-12 days. I was public school educated. I actually was a part of student council my senior year, and I was the student representative on the school board. And that actually started my interest in school board and K-12 education back then. More currently, my involvement with K-12 education was my previous role at my institution. I was an associate dean in the School of Education, and it was one of my responsibilities over the academics to prepare our teacher licensure programs. So I was heavily involved in developing curriculum to meet the competencies of VETO in order to have our programs approved by the state, along with the national accreditor for teacher education, CAPE. And so I worked heavily with our local schools, the Virginia Department of Education, and our faculty to develop a curriculum that met the requirements and the standards set forth for us as an institution, as an education preparation provider. As far as my involvement with Lynchburg City Schools, I will be honest, I don't have very much involvement. I moved into the city about 7 years ago and bought a home, and so I haven't had much interactions with Lynchburg City Schools, but I've had interactions with local schools through my interactions as an associate dean. And so I haven't been hands-on with Lynchburg City Schools other than representatives from various schools working with my institution in order to prepare our programs to make sure we have effective and competent teachers to enter the workforce.
Okay, and where did you attend public schools?
In New York, sorry, I don't know if I said that. I'm from upstate New York, outside
Okay.
of Binghamton, Vestal, New York.
Okay,
So, yes.
all right, thank you.
Good to have you here today, and reading over your resume and application, and thank you for very extensive. A school board member has to look at lots of things. They're a volunteer, so it's lots of times we just take what we get from the bureaucrats, and the superintendent that says, here's what it is. So when we look at Lynchburg's taxes and Lynchburg's spending and our school funding, we come up to the point that Lynchburg is the 3rd highest staffed school system in the entire state of Virginia. With that, there's lots of ways that we can skin a cat. You can have lots of employees, pay them very little, or have less employees and pay them a lot. And that's up to the school board. And it's up to the school board to decide and to kind of really dissect rather than just rubber stamping what the superintendent says, and because they have their interest. How can you, again, as a volunteer, as a, as a part-timer that's kind of has to listen to the data that's collected by the bureaucrats, how can you discern and say, hey, here's what we really need versus here's what we're getting?
Professionally, currently, I just deal with data all day long. That's actually something I'm heavily involved in.
You do what was that? Excuse me?
I deal with data an awful lot in my
Okay.
current position when it comes to dealing with accreditation and assessment. So a lot of data points come in. However, writing narratives and explaining that data is not always as easy, and a lot of people don't enjoy it. I do enjoy it. I do it professionally, and so given that circumstance you just outlined, it's really looking at the data points the best you can, getting the best background knowledge you can based upon where the data came from. Is the data accurate? Does it make sense? And then also taking, again, into account the perspective of those administrators. So the superintendent's input is very important. Other board members are very important, and the community. I think the school board, as a representation of the community, needs to understand what the community needs are and where those are at. So really being able to look at the data, assess it in a holistic approach, really looking at why it's that way, where the trends trends are at, where it could be going, and what changes would impact the current data and where those trends could go would be instrumental. And so a lot of it depends on subjectively looking at it and figuring out what that data is actually telling us and why, and then making a change if needed and seeing what that change will result in. And so it's hard to say without looking at the specific data, but I would say I would approach it by trying to analyze what's before me, why it's there, taking the input narrative-wise from stakeholders, and then working with the board to come up with the best options and decisions. And you started off that question or comment with the fact that you either have lots of employees and pay them little, or you have a few employees and pay them a lot. And neither of those are going to work. You're not going to have retention, or you're going to have people that are overburdened and aren't going to want to stay. And so it's a very difficult thing to navigate, but it's something that's important, and it needs to be looked at with intentionality and with purpose. And so I think it's a very good question, something that if it's a major issue in the local school district, then it's something we need to assess pretty quickly.
Thank you.
Have you thought about, or could you talk a little bit about what your vision would be for the next 5 to 10 years for the Lynchburg public school system?
Well, I've heard and seen in the news and from just conversations here that there is teacher turnover. There is lower enrollment, and then we just got over, I wouldn't say over, we're still going through a pandemic where students had gaps in learning or issues, and so student achievement's going to be big. So I think one of the biggest things I would see envisioned for the school board right now is bringing the community together through collaboration and focusing on our students. Our students and getting them to graduation is the mission, but it's also very important. It's what we're here for. It's what public education and K-12 schools are for. And so I really envision finding ways to make sure we retain highly qualified educators, making sure they're prepared, they want to stay, they want to be a part of the community, they want to invest their professional and personal lives in the community, in the city. I want to make sure we're looking at students. I want to know where those achievement gaps are at, why they're there, what we can do to correct those gaps, and how the school board can support our educators, our teachers, our administrators, and the community in helping our students achieve those goals and to reach graduation one day and be able to move on, whether it's higher education or it's a job, being a proactive citizen in the local community.
Thank you. Vice Mayor?
You outlined a couple significant issues that the schools are dealing with: turnover, lower enrollment, gaps in learning, student achievement. What issue gives you the most significant pause, and why?
I think I'm immediately going to say student performance and achievement gaps, but that also goes back to educators. And so I'd actually have to group those two together. If we're not retaining educators, if educators don't want to come here, if we're not getting the best educators, then I don't believe we're going to be getting the student performance that we want. And that's not a knock on the current teachers in the schools. There's various issues and a lot of things going on that may be causing this. I'm just hitting on one piece from a somewhat uneducated, not in the system and not digging into the data all the time. But by looking at that, I really want to make sure we have the educators that we need, that they want to stay, that they want to invest in the student. I'm sure all of us can think back to a time when we were in education, no matter where it was at, and that a teacher actually invested in us and cared about us. And so really bringing in high quality teachers and training them and giving them the support they need, I believe that will help bring up morale, help keep retention, and help students actually achieve what we want them to achieve through our standards of instruction.
Do you have a sense of why we have struggles with retention?
Not necessarily. There's a teacher shortage across the entire country. It isn't just in Lynchburg. It isn't just in Virginia. It's across the country. It's it's K-12 education. Education is one of the most regulated fields in the country. You have state departments of ed. You have local community boards. You have federal government coming in. You have politics involved. So since it's such a regulated field, one of the most, you're going to come up with a lot of issues. And so I don't necessarily have the issue or the answers to those issues, but I know that it's an issue. It's something that I have a passion to look at, to delve into a bit more, and try to help find proactive solutions in my own community.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for coming in today. We really appreciate you willing to serve. What school do your children attend?
I have a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old that aren't in school currently. And then I have a first grader who's currently at New Covenant schools. He actually came up to kindergarten during the pandemic. And so my wife and I, who's a licensed educator, she's an elementary teacher, not currently practicing, but she's licensed, we decided with COVID, stability was really one of the biggest things we wanted for our child. Being an educator myself, stability is really important. And so we decided to homeschool my son in kindergarten with my wife in order to offer that stability.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Sorry, yes.
Can you articulate your understanding of the role of a school board member?
Yeah.
And also in the current environment where so much information, there's a group that sometimes the main image is to be how negative a school system can be, or how much negative information there is about their school rate or this and that, which is always kind of just attacking our school system. As a school board member, what will your role be as a school board member?
I really see it as serving the community and serving the school, serving the educators and the teachers and the administrators. Right now that we've been speaking, and a lot of it has been about negative issues impacting our schools, and that's a good thing to focus on because we're going to correct that. But unfortunately, that's the narrative in the news and in the media, is how negative our schools are, or negative performance, or just negative issues. And again, we need to look at that data and change that narrative and that perspective. But I also believe that being a school board member, we can change that by setting a more positive tone, by having more positive relationships, by engaging with our schools and making sure we can support them. I'm not in a K-12 school, so I can't tell you all their needs right now. I have outside perspective. I have various professional experience of why that might be. But I need to partner with my local schools. I would want to partner with the administration, the educators, to understand what is it that you need and how can we support you, and how can we as a community come together to support our students, to help them reach really the goals that we want them to reach.
Thank you. You know, looking at the data, the majority of our teachers are from Liberty University. As a Liberty educator, what role do they play in supporting the school system, or helping with the learning loss, or the decline in enrollment, or declining in test scores?
That's a great question. One of our more recent accreditors, CAPE, I don't know if you all know, and CAPE was prior. We moved to CAPE, and CAPE really does require local P-12 partnerships. And
when I ran off college,
you know more than I do.
I'm so tired of it.
Let me give you the mic. I'll give you the mic. So my whole job is all about the regulators coming in and working with us. And so we really had to start formalizing partnerships with our P-12 schools. And being at Liberty, we are large and we deal with cross state lines. So we actually have to partner with schools across state lines across the country in order to support our students. And so really engaging with and partnering with K-12 schools is what's most important. So Liberty's really worked the last couple of years to build those relationships. Where are the teacher shortages? What are the endorsement areas we need, whether it's an initial and advanced, and how can we develop that curriculum to support you, to get teachers in the classrooms? And so it's one way that we've kind of done that more recently.
Okay, thank you.
I'm looking for a school board appointee who really focuses on the 4 main disciplines of academics. And in my mind, those are math, history, science, and English. How will you be an advocate for putting strong emphasis for these core disciplines in academics? And how also will you strive for accountability to achieve suitable and superior success rates in those areas?
Yeah, I would go back to looking at the data. You probably hear me say that a lot, is looking at the current scores, where are we at and what's going on and why. We talked about teacher retention. Are those teachers retaining? Are they staying? What can we do to support to bring in STEM teachers in order to lift our student scores? And so a lot of it would be really just figuring out what is currently going on and why, looking at the trends and looking at the issues, and then really being an advocate for that. We want our students to be critical thinkers. We want them to understand those disciplines that are really critical to being successful outside of school. And so being an advocate for those disciplines, but all disciplines, I believe is important. But you touch on some very important ones that I feel as though tend to lack maybe the performance we want in a lot of our K-12 schools. And so knowing that firsthand, I think, is important. That's one of the issues and something we need to focus on. And then 2 would be really figuring out ways to support the current faculty that are there teaching those subjects. What's going on and why aren't we performing? Why are there issues? Speaking to and listening to them, but then also formatting plans of action. We can talk all day about issues and problems and concerns, but if we don't have action plans that are measurable, that we can follow up on regularly to see if they're successful, we're not going to be doing anything. We can talk about certain subject matters being important, wanting to change it, but unless we actually have plans to follow through and ways to measure and see how we've done success and how successful we've been, we're not going to go anywhere. So I really believe focusing on the high need areas and the biggest issues and coming up with practical plans that make sense, that support our educators, is the best path moving forward.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Dr. Struble, many of the city's schools are taught by graduates of local colleges whose teaching experiences, student teaching experiences, are in parochial or private schools. And the city schools presents some challenging urban school issues regarding behavior and other stressors. Given the population of the schools being largely urban, do you have any thoughts on how or why or whether the city schools should require its teachers to have actual firsthand knowledge and experience in teaching in an urban school environment? And you touched on it in response to Councilmember Wilder's response.
Culturally responsive teaching is very important. Unfortunately, with a teacher shortage, we can't always require, demand, or expect that experience, although I think it would be very warranted and recommended. But if that can't be done and we're in need of educators, I would encourage that we have culturally responsive teaching training. We work with our educators, we work with our teachers to have the support they need, to have the knowledge they need, and the training that they need in order to be successful with the students that are in their classroom. And so it's not as easy as requiring something and hoping we get candidates. It's a matter of let's provide that for them if we can and support our current educators and new ones that come in with what they need to be successful.
How do you do that?
It's setting up proper training and understanding of what it looks like. And so we can look at various higher education systems that provide maybe that training. I know local schools often urban education clubs for their current students in higher ed who want to be teachers. And so it's really looking at what's going on in the field, looking at what experts are saying, what research is out there, and developing a nice training and support mechanism to help our current teachers in the field.
Is that an expensive process?
I would have to look at the budget for that one. But yeah, probably it's going to involve some finances and some professional development. And that's a matter of looking at where our current resources are allocated and looking at moving things around if need be in order to meet a need. So as we look at the data, we look at different issues going on in the school system, we need to be able to properly allocate funds where they need to be in order to meet the needs that we have. And so it's not as easy as throwing more money at something. Money isn't the answer. It's coming up with actual rich content that's actually going to change what we're doing.
Are some of those proposals and projects being undertaken by other Virginia localities similar to Lynchburg?
I would think so, yes. If that's not something that's currently offered and that we're currently doing, I'm sure other school systems or other districts are involved in something similar that I would love to be able to collaborate with them and even work with the Virginia Department of Education to see what they may have in order to support our local teachers.
Good. Thank you, Dr. Struble.
Thank you. I appreciate that follow-up to both my council members' questions, because I think when we hear folks talk about the number of teachers leaving, the number of staff, quality people, I think sometimes there's also a different perspective that sometimes people can't cut the mustard and teaching in a public education urban environment. And so great quality people may be good elsewhere, but they may not be good for an administration that's trying to deal with challenges and the opportunities of teaching in an urban environment. So I appreciate your answer. Because they were asked those questions in depth, I'm going to go to another question. As far as online platform education, does it require more investment of people and funding for the technology, or less investment because it's not as much the hands-on, high-touch approach? And do you kind of give less in the technology arena when you're building an online platform? And say with the pandemic, having to do that in public education on the drop of a pivotal moment, and also how do you follow up with the investment in that technology to support that platform for the students that are preferring maybe to learn that way, or those that it's adding opportunities and we have to help drive that motivation online?
There's a lot in that question, but I do appreciate it. So online education is not easy. It's not as simple as turning on a switch and saying, okay, great, we're going to go to online. It does require some investment. It does require some funds and technology. It also requires teacher training. Not every educator was trained in how to teach in online education. I know we're moving more towards that, and you're learning how to interact online in K-12. You're also learning how to teach online in higher ed. But just turning it on and utilizing it isn't always the answer and isn't always easy. And as you've alluded to, there are performance gaps because of that. parents struggle with it as well. What do you do with a student who's home to learn online, but a parent is not there or a guardian is not there because they're working? It's not easy to handle behavior management in an online environment as well, because you're not physically there with students and working with them. And so it has a lot of challenges that not only require technology to be purchased, but professional development for educators, and everything that's needed in order to train faculty to be able to successfully administer an online class. And so, again, it's not as easy as just either putting money at it or expecting students to just be successful. A lot of thought process needs to go into it in order for learning outcomes to be met, to make sure students' needs are met, to make sure that educators feel supported and are supported in what they're doing when it comes to an online classroom.
What is your opinion of a blended model of online learning in person coming back after COVID in a public school division?
Yeah, a blended model can actually work really well. Again, a lot of it goes down to the individual students sometimes. And so some students may not enjoy that process, or they may not do well in an online or blended process. But research does show that blended process can work. It can work for a lot of different students. It can work for a lot of different subject areas and content areas. And so looking at that approach and that model can be very successful if it works with your community, and it's something your community wants to embrace and is okay with supporting and moving forward with. And so I do believe blended formats do work well and can work well if they're implemented properly and they're implemented with the support that's needed for educators and students.
Thank you.
In Lynchburg, we have, and I know you mentioned about your one of your children going through COVID and how difficult that is, and especially both you and your wife, professional educators. You know, you're not alone. In Lynchburg, we got about 12,500 school-age kids, of which 7,400 use the free, if you will, public school. With that, that's about 40% that say we're going elsewhere. What could you do to help bridge that gap to say maybe you got to come back, or maybe we got to recognize a problem, and maybe we can understand and figure out we got to come up with a solution? But if people don't recognize there's a problem, pretty hard to come up with a solution. What would you do? Do you recognize that as a problem? What kind of solutions would you come up with?
I'm not sure I necessarily have solutions just yet, but I think a lot of it is the narrative and what people are hearing currently in the news about public education in K-12 schools. That doesn't always help. Also, in the Lynchburg area, there's a large amount of private schools and opportunities for people to send their students. And so when there's so many options and the ability to send your children elsewhere or do something else, it can happen. So I think a lot of it is working with the school board and local schools to kind of change the image and the narrative of what's currently going on. Let's highlight the positives that are going on. Let's highlight the student success that we have, and kind of not focus so much on potentially the common negative themes that we hear throughout the country when it comes to the field of education in K-12 schools.
Do you think it would be a bad thing if if Lynchburg City Council appointed somebody to the school board, the Lynchburg City School Board, that didn't have kids in the public school system?
Not necessarily. I mean, having a child involved in K-12 education is a great resource and is a great opportunity to hear a perspective from a parent. But people come from all walks of life. People come from various backgrounds, different educations. I think it's worth bringing on the right person for the job. I think if someone has experience, knowledge, or the willpower to come on in and do something that's outside the norm or may not fit a certain box, that's a good thing. I think having a school board with diverse individuals and thinking and thought processes is actually a plus, and it actually can help us move the school board forward or the school system forward.
Great, thank you.
So I've been around the whole accreditation data input
And my
for the
friends
last
are here. This is great.
27 years, and I realize how much work that is and how much you have to do in order to satisfy SACs and the rest of them. So my question to you is, like, how do you tweak your higher education skill set, because it's different, in order to work with the pre-K through 12 in that arena?
It's actually one reason why I applied. I would love to expand my knowledge and understanding and experience in K-12 education. So I may not be the best candidate because I don't have that experience, but I have a desire and a will to learn it and to be a part of it. And so I wouldn't just say education's education. Higher ed is different than K-12. But when it comes to accreditation, requirements, standards, assessment, evaluation, it's technically the same. It's just getting the right people on the bus to understand how we implement what we need to implement and how we evaluate. And so I believe the experience I've had in a school of education and now dealing with primarily with SAC COC, working with a diverse group of people, being given a nice big book of standards and requirements, I believe that can easily be transferred down to K-12 education, just with a little differently having K-12 students as opposed to higher ed students. And so a lot of it just probably is similar, but it does require a bit of a different focus, a different mindset of knowing your audience and who you're working with, and that's absolutely fine. That's something I would look forward to.
Thank you.
So this is a somewhat personal question, but I hope you'll appreciate why I ask it. It's a follow-up to Councilmember Helgeson's question, which is some people might see the appointment of somebody who has children of K through 12 age, but does not send them to the public schools as signaling a lack of faith in the institution. How would you respond to that?
Well, the biggest thing is every child's different, and you look at every child differently, and parents want the best for their child based upon who their child is. And so we spent that first year, as I mentioned, with kindergarten with homeschooling my child, and realized we really enjoyed, again, that stability and what that brought us. And so we actually toured a lot of different schools, and we looked around, but my wife and I both being educators, and we wanted what was the best for my oldest son. He is a very rule follower. He's very big into making whomever is teaching him happy. And so when we visit a lot of different schools, one of the things that drew us to where we're at now is really the focus on the individual and the small class sizes. So that's why we chose that for our oldest child. I have two other children that are growing up, and we're learning their personalities and what fits them. And there's always an opportunity for us to move and switch based upon what our child needs. And so that's the reason why we chose where we're currently at with our student.
Did you visit public schools?
We did not visit the public schools, no.
And why not?
We were waiting for an open house, but it was COVID, and so we didn't go because we tried to, again, to restrain ourselves and stay home. And then as we were looking at and speaking to others in the area, a lot of them spoke highly of what New Covenant did for their child. That was very similar to our son. And so as we kept looking, we ended up focusing on New Covenant.
Okay.
We actually started looking before COVID a little bit as he was entering kindergarten, then it hit, and we kind of stopped.
Okay. And then just, you mentioned diversity of points of view on the board. To what degree, if any, should the Lynchburg City Schools take into account the diversity of its student population and diversity, equity, and inclusion as part of its operating practice?
I think it would be very vital to operating in practice because I believe that we need to focus on our student population. It's not about the school board. It's not about the administration. It's not even about the teachers per se. It's really about the students. And so it's about looking at what our student population is, our student demographics, and building a community of public education that fits their needs and fits what we need, what needs to make those students successful.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Struble.
Again, thank you for coming. Really appreciate it. Considering, it's kind of piggyback on some of the same questions you've already kind of answered a little bit. Considering that we have in our region, Lynchburg has the highest poverty rate, which is over 20% versus other areas in our region, like other counties. So we have a high poverty rate, and also 50% of our children are in single-family homes. So as a school board member, how do you address that? How do you set policies that will address those issues in our unique situation here in Lynchburg, Virginia?
Well, it's really setting up programs that support the students and the needs of the community. And so I haven't necessarily looked at the budget. I haven't looked through it, line by line to see where our finances are spent and what we're doing. But it's really figuring out what is it that we can do as a board to support our community. Again, I said it's not about the board, the administration. It's about the community and the students. It's about making sure we're developing students to be the next leaders, the next generation that comes forward in our region in Lynchburg City. And so I would say it's really worth looking at and allocating our funds to support parents, support guardians, and to support our students in whatever needs there are. If there are economic needs or other needs, we need to focus on that to be able to bring our students where they need to be so that when they come to the classroom, they're prepared, they're comfortable, their needs are met, and they can actually learn while they're in the classroom.
Okay, thank you.
A couple years ago, the state legislature afforded the opportunity and authority to municipalities and school boards to entertain collective bargaining agreements with their employees, otherwise known as unions. And the reason, well, not the reason, but localities would be police, fire, trash pickup, employees, finance folks, what have you in this locality. But then the school division, because they are technically their own body and their own entity, school boards were given that same authority. And with that, should you be appointed to the school board, would you be supportive or in opposition to a collective bargaining agreement with Lynchburg City schools, employees?
I would have to say I have to look more at what's going on and what's occurring and what it means. I'll say I do not fully understand it all and what is going on currently and what that looks like. Would I be open to having a conversation about whether or not it should be done or not be done fully? I'd want to hear why we want to move that in that direction, or why we should not move in that direction, and be able to support our educators in our community. If by starting something like this is going to help support the community and meet needs and support our educators and move the school forward, it's something I would want to consider. If it has opportunity to hinder our educators or hinder our student performance or hinder our community in any way, then it's something I might not be in favor of. But I would have to hear both sides and have to dig into it a bit more to actually make a stance or make an opinion on the matter.
So in creating a situation where you're on the school board and the school board has confirmed or approved some agreement with the workforce, seeing as the council is the legislative appropriating body of the funds, and the recommendation or request from the school division, which is then locked arms with the union, and council then says no.
We're at a standstill.
What happens in that circumstance where you as a school board member are an appointed, non-elected position entertaining an agreement with a third party who is also not appointed or elected and is now binding circumstances where the elected bodies, you can see the situation I'm describing, and ultimately within the question, my hope and expectation is for appointees that as we're the ones who are elected by the community to make those decisions, that be solely left to those who are elected to do so. So if you have a response to that, I welcome it. If you don't, that's totally fine.
Yeah, I mean,
but-
you technically just answered that. I mean,
Yeah.
if you're running into unelected officials making decisions that impact your community and the finances of your city, there's an issue there. I think it warrants broader conversation and discussion. I don't think a school board or teachers or third parties shouldn't have a seat at the table, but I don't think they should be the sole decision maker. I think that they can weigh their options, they can talk about it, and maybe propose what they believe is best for the community and the school, and allow elected officials to make the decision from there on out.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have a few minutes left, and I just want to ask you, do you have any questions for any of us?
No, I appreciate you. You all asked really good questions, and so yeah, I was nervous. I speak fast, being from New York, and so I was just going as you. You guys got me good. No, I appreciate your time and your service. I know you guys have been working hard all day today, and I know you have more interviews in the future, and I don't fully envy that because you're probably asking the same questions and you're getting some of the same answers. But I appreciate you and all that you're doing and investing in our community and the school board by taking time to sit down and ask these type of questions. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for willing to serve. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. You guys have a good day.